A second woman has come forward accusing former Vice President Joe Biden of unwanted touching. Amy Lapos, who used to work for a Connecticut congressman, says Biden rubbed his nose against hers at a fundraiser nearly 10 years ago. She says the encounter was not sexual, but thought the vice president was going to kiss her. Last week, former Nevada legislator Lucy Flores accused Biden of inappropriate behavior, saying he grabbed her shoulders and kissed the back of her head in 2014 while she was running for lieutenant governor. Officials who have worked with Biden have been asked about his behavior, including Valerie Jarrett. She was the longest-serving senior advisor to President Barack Obama and worked with Biden in the White House for all 8 years of the Obama presidency. She has a new book out today titled Finding My Voice, My Journey to the West Wing and the Path Forward. The memoir looks back on her childhood in Iran all the way through her time at the White House. And Valerie Jarrett is here with me now. Valerie, such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya.
Congratulations on your book. I so enjoyed reading it, especially the childhood in Iran, which we will get to.
It's a little unusual.
It is. It's very exciting. We'll get to that in a moment. But I first have to ask you about Joe Biden. You know, yesterday I interviewed Lucy Flores, who was one of the accusers who came forward, saying she felt very uncomfortable with the behavior of Biden because she didn't know him that well when he touched her shoulders and allegedly kissed her head and all of that. And she wasn't satisfied with his response, which was to say he didn't mean anything ill-intentioned by it, but he was listening to women who talk about it. Now, she felt that he should have said, my behavior was inappropriate. And he's sort of stopped shy of saying that. Do you agree with her?
Well, I think what he said is very important. He said, we are at an inflection point in our country. And I am just heartened by so many women, brave women who were part of the original Me Too movement, who came forward. And it's hard to come forward and talk about whether it's sexual harassment or whether it's just you feel uncomfortable, whatever it is. And so I think he was right to say we have to listen to their voices and we have to hear what they have to say. So I thought he hit it just right.
And you, of course, worked with him for 8 years at the White House.
I worked with him every day for 8 years and 2 campaigns, yes.
And did you ever witness another woman who might have felt a little uncomfortable by his sort of gregarious affection?
I didn't, but no. As I said earlier today, I think what's important is not whether I witnessed it, but how do these women feel? And I wrote a whole book about finding our voice and trying to figure out ways where we can empower one another to talk and express ourselves if we're uncomfortable, and help men understand that it isn't just their intent. It's like, how does it affect the person who was impacted by it? And listening is a way to have better understanding. And so I appreciate the fact that he said men, and not just himself, but men generally, have to start listening. I think that's a step in the right direction.
And so you think he understands, and you think that that doesn't disqualify him, the alleged behavior?
No, look, what's great about our country is that anyone who wants to run for president can make your case directly to the American people. And you have a fair shot to be heard, and I think there's plenty of opportunity. He hasn't even gotten in the race yet, but should he choose to do so, I think he gets that opportunity, and let the American people be the judge.
All right. Okay, let's talk about security clearances for a moment, if you don't mind. As you know, there's been a little bit of a brouhaha over how security clearances may have been overturned in this administration. How were they handled in the Obama administration?
Well, very simply, we deferred to the national security team, the experts who look at everybody's background and determine whether or not they should have a clearance. And if they didn't recommend someone to have a clearance, they didn't get the clearance. It was just that simple. Pretty cut and dry. And the reason why, and the underlying purpose is, it's designed to keep America safe.
Right.
And that has to be paramount in the eyes, I think, of whoever the president is and their team. You want to make sure that people don't have access to information who experts have determined might use it inappropriately.
Right. All right. So, you know, in your book, you obviously outline all the efforts you went through with President Obama to get the Affordable Care Act. It was his signature piece of legislation. As you know, the current administration is still trying to overturn it. What do you think of that? And what do you think of Medicare for All, which has become somewhat of a rallying cry for younger Democrats?
Well, I think it is appalling at this stage that Republicans are still talking about getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. 20 million people have health care. We have 1 in 2 Americans who has a pre-existing condition. And that can be anything from asthma to being pregnant to having a more serious disease. So when you need insurance the most, you shouldn't have insurance companies able to discriminate against you. If we roll it back, they will. Young people can now stay on their parents' plan until they're 26. They can start a business, be entrepreneurial, and not have to feel tethered to their former employer. They can go out and do what they want. Senior citizens who were cutting their medicine in half to stretch it, which sometimes has awful consequences. Under the Affordable Care Act, it's more affordable. And so women, preventive care, all of this is good for America. And so I am clueless as to why Republicans would want to roll back those benefits and hurt the American people.
And what do you think of Medicare for All?
I think, look, we should be always looking for ways of making insurance more, or health care more available to the American people. I think it's a moonshot. I think that there are a lot of steps between where we are and there, but I like the idea that people are thinking creatively about our health care. I don't think it should be a privilege. I think it should be a right. I think it should be an affordable right, and we need to figure out how to continue our hard work of making that possible.
All right, now looking ahead to the 2020 Democratic race. Obviously, in your book, it's so fascinating to hear how you first met the Obamas and first got in touch with Barack Obama. So you witnessed some of that early magic. Is there any candidate in this field that reminds you of a young Barack Obama? Some people are saying Beto O'Rourke bears a resemblance.
I think we have the good fortune of an embarrassment of riches. I think that the field in the Democratic Party already is terrific, and it's encouraging to know that there are still additional people who might jump in. And I think it's heartening that in this kind of toxic climate that there are good people who still want to run for office. I think it's heartening that there are 5 women running for office. That's historic and unprecedented. And so I think it's also very early in the campaign, and we should give it time. I know what it's like to spend 6 months in Iowa. I learned to love Iowa. Let's see how these candidates do. Let's see how the early states turn out. Let's see what happens when they take a punch. Let's see how they respond when they're under pressure. And in a sense, it's a tryout for the most important job in the world. And I think I, at least, am going to reserve judgment until we get a little further down the line.
Very diplomatic answer. So there's
well, it's how I feel. It's truly how I feel. I think it's early.
There's no one. So I'm just curious, have you spoken to the Obamas recently? Have they read your book?
They have both read my book. Yes, they both were very supportive today on social media, lifting it up, for which I'm forever grateful.
Wonderful. Do you have a sense that that the former president will take more of a hand in campaigning once we get closer to 2020?
I think he said he cares a great deal about the outcome of this election. We saw him campaign in the midterm elections, and I think it was very impactful. And so I expect that he will get involved. He's been making himself available to several of the candidates who've sought his advice and counsel. And after winning not just 1 but 2 elections, he's got a lot to say about what it takes. And I think that's all very encouraging.
Has he weighed in with you at all about, the Biden allegations and the current Me Too movement that we're in? You write in your book about somewhat of a macho atmosphere that made some of the senior women under the Obama administration at a certain point feel a little unwelcome at the table.
Very early on. And I will say, President Obama took that counsel and immediately invited all the women over to his home for dinner. And he said, I need you to tell me, I need to listen, and I need to hear what you think the concerns are. And then he said he wanted help from the rest of his senior team, and he was determined to have the kind of culture that was a role model for businesses in the private and public sector all across our country. And we ended up with half of our department heads who were women. He promoted every woman who was in the senior-most position while he was there, except for me, because I started out in that position. And I think what he made clear is that he wanted a culture that was inclusive, that was welcoming, where no matter how junior you were, he relished having a conversation and engaging with you, all because he wanted to make the best decisions possible. And he recognized that diversity is a strength.
Right. And you say that things changed after that conversation.
They did.
It's fabulous. I often say the best feminists are fathers to daughters.
I actually think that's true. And for him, raised by a single mom, lived with his grandparents for a while, saw his grandmother hit a glass ceiling. Here he's married to this dynamic, talented woman who was a person of great accomplishment on her own right. And he has these 2 daughters. So he came to the table wanting to send the message about how important it was that all voices were heard.
So have you 2 personally discussed the Biden allegations?
I haven't talked to him about that. No. We certainly have talked about the Me Too movement and all the brave women who've come forward. And at great personal risk, it's hard to come forward and talk about something like a sexual allegation. When you've been through that, it is one of the most traumatic experiences you can have. And so it's heartening to see the kind of movement that has taken place over the last couple of years in our country.
All right, so let's talk about your childhood in Iran. A lot of people go, wait a minute, you were born there,
I was born in Iran, I was.
But you are not Iranian.
No, my parents are both American. My dad was born in Washington, D.C., my mother in Chicago. both grew up under the Jim Crow era. And in the mid-50s, when my dad was trying to find a job at a major teaching institution in the United States, he couldn't find one where the pay was comparable to his white counterparts. And so he and my mom, who were kind of adventuresome spirits, said, well, let's look for opportunities outside of the United States. And he heard about a position to help start a new hospital and run the Department of Pathology at the Namazi Hospital in Shiraz, Iran. I was the second baby born in the hospital. I always say they practiced on some other baby first, and then along came Valerie. We lived there till I was 5, and we went back pretty frequently until I graduated from high school.
And I want to ask you, because of course you were a major part of the, the first administration with a black president. How do you think race relations have evolved or devolved under the current administration?
Well, look, I think we are still a work in progress. I don't think electing a black president makes us post-racial. I think it was a step in the right direction. I think that thanks to social media and cell phones and people's willingness to come forward and speak up about issues that were sensitive and sometimes brushed under the rug before, I think that's progress. I think that's a good sign. What I don't like is the toxicity in the air. I don't like the polarization. I don't like the fueling, the fire that shows where we have differences as opposed to what we have in common. I think part of why President Obama won not once but twice was because his message was one of unification, of what we have together, of how together we can make our country stronger and better, and not one that was polarizing. And so I am worried I'm worried a great bit about the rhetoric. But the best way to combat that is for ordinary Americans to get involved, to vote, to make their voices heard, and to really participate in our democracy.
Any chance you might be participating in the democracy as a candidate anytime soon?
My goal, funny you should ask, is to help other candidates run and win. I am working with President Obama and his new foundation, a platform for civic engagement to help people take great ideas to scale all over our country. I'm working with Mrs. Obama on When We All Vote, designed to change our culture around voting. I was so disappointed that 43% of Americans didn't vote in the last presidential election. It was better in the midterms. We saw more turnout there than we had in the past, but we still have a long way to go.
All right, a lot of people wonder when you might hold office as well, but...
Well, that's kind of you to say. Not in this chapter.
Valerie Jarrett, thank you so much for coming to see us.